Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the opening of this year's cycle of conferences held by the Research Center for the History and Circulation of Philosophical Idea. Our special guest that made us the honor to accept our virtual meeting today is Professor Simon Critchley. And this dialogue is occasioned by a large interest of our philosophical community towards one of his last books that you already know, devoted to the poetics of football, What We Think About When We Think About Soccer. So Simon is a Hans Jonas professor at philosophy at the New School for Social Research. His work engages in many areas: continental philosophy, philosophy and literature, psychoanalysis, ethics, and political theory, among others. And his most recent books include The Problem with Levinas and ABC of Impossibility, though he has written on topics as diverse as David Bowie, religion, and suicide. As moderator of The Stone at the New York Times, Professor Critchley asks philosophers to weigh in on contemporary issues in art, literature, politics, and popular culture. Welcome, Simon, and thank you very much for accepting to spend some valuable time with us.
Thank you very much. Was that a Romanian translation of the football book?
We are going to have a Romanian translation.
Okay, great. So, I didn't know. That's great.
Yes, we are going to ensure that as well. And with your agreement, we are going to publish a little part of our interview, just to make the material easier to be accessed. So, if you agree, I would like to have a conversation with you that goes after three main topics, three main subjects. First of all, I would like to address some things related to your book as they came to me both from myself and from your readers. You have a fan club here, so whenever you have time to come to Romania after this pandemic, I promise to take you to a football game.
I'd love to come to Romania.
So it's
I spent a lot of time in Greece, so I mean, I could just pop over the border. I'm in Greece usually once or twice a year, so
if your program allows it, just let us know and we'll do the rest. So Simon, you have conceived what you call here a poetics of football, not a philosophy of football. And of course that we have read your project, your book, and we have seen that it's inspired by one of your most precious passions, namely soccer. You gave here a socialist, let's say, ideological outlook. You argued that both theory and praxis are equally important in order to understand what means to be a smart supporter and a stupid supporter in the same thing.
Yeah, right.
And of course that your project surprises through an original reconstruction of the historicity of football that reveals some cardinal categories, such as, and I quote from your book, living, disgust, reproduction, musicality, and many others. So I was wondering how a philosophy of football should look like, and why did you prefer something that, in my opinion, is more subtler and more difficult to control, meaning the poetics of soccer that you have published?
Well, I'm I've always been at war with philosophy. I mean, I teach philosophy, but I've always been involved in a kind of a lifelong war against certain philosophical tendencies. So the football book is, I mean, a clue to what I'm up to is I was just looking at this in the last few minutes. There's a quotation from William James, the epigraph, which is from a really beautiful essay. And my approach is close to someone like James, or phenomenology, existential phenomenology. And it's, I don't believe in metaphysics. I don't think you can give a philosophical account of the deep structure of reality through concepts or axioms or first principles. I think that's a huge mistake. It's a mistake that begins with Plato or a certain reading of Plato and carries on. So I want to. I'm trying to contrast a philosophy of football with a poetics of football, and by a poetics of football, I understand something which tries to get as close as possible to the experience of football, as close as possible to the experience of football, to the the existential matrix of football, if you like. That's what interests me, and if we get really close to football, what concepts might appear from that, and how, and then that might be a challenge to philosophy. I hope it is a challenge to philosophy. And also, one thing you said at the beginning about the socialist approach, it's my argument is it's a paradoxical argument, because I think football is a paradox. Like my team, Liverpool Football Club, we have an ethos, a kind of a series of beliefs amongst the fans that are close to forms of cooperation, forms of socialism, if you like. That's true of other teams as well. But what makes the whole thing work is money. Mm-hmm. So there's a contradiction in football between, if you like, a certain socialism of being a fan and being equal with other fans, and in a sense equal with the players and with the coach and everybody else. And on the other hand, there is this huge presence of money in football. So I think football is an experience of a contradiction, a very radical contradiction. And as proof of that, we could just think about the results of the Champions League quarterfinals this week, which were very, very bad for my team, and very good for Paris Saint-Germain and for Manchester City. And both of those two teams were, a financial project, really their investment opportunities by the Arab states to create a football team, a successful football team. And so I think football is a beautiful, glorious thing, which I love. And it's at the same time, it's a source of horror, disgust, and outrage, right? Just think about the World Cup, Qatar 2022. I mean, I still find that difficult to even think about.
Please.
Go on, yeah.
I was listening to you, and I was recalling Cornel Dino, one of our national trainers, who said at once, I don't think that football has a philosophy, but it has an ethics. And that might be more obsessing and more difficult for us as supporters or as players than anything else. So given the fact that we got our discussion here in the realm of ethics, I would like to know, how do you handle this kind of paradox that you have mentioned? Because as any form of sport, soccer involves, let's say, a moral engagement that comes both from supporters and from players. It has a social sense of participation. It has some core values that we embrace all, and sometimes we convert them to a sort of hygiene of life, let's say so, at least in terms of collective identity represented by a football club. And somehow we might find it similar with what bridges religious communities. So there is something quite, let's say, spiritual, even eschatological sometimes. And however, when we talk about the world of soccer, as you have already mentioned, we have to admit that we have some bad occurrences of scandal, of moral disappointment, corruption, dirty money, traffic of influence that alter policies of transfer, so on and so forth. So how does it come that a moral experience such as football involves a potential immoral context that develops sport as business? And how do you think that we all can immunize the future talents from the unfair games behind the doors of management of football clubs? Because if we have, let's say, business ethics, we should address it equally to football. And I've seen in the last years that is less interest to direct the ethical discourse towards, let's say, business with football. What's our duty as philosophers to do something in this aspect?
I'm not sure. I mean, I think it's a mess because there is a moral dimension to football, of course, and we could talk about that. And I've got some things to say about that. But I think the point of my book, in a way, it comes out in the last paragraph, is that it's impossible to feel good about football. Mm-hmm. Football is the people that love it is, like me, it's one of the most important things in my life. Maybe the most important thing in my life, if you look at it a certain way, in terms of a continuity of support over, in my case, my family with Liverpool, it's a century, it's 100 years, it's a long time. So that sense in which it's hugely important, and the whole thing is compromised by money, by corruption, by cynicism, by agents, by all that. And I mean, there are, and the problem, the problem is that there are certain ways of organizing football which are more responsive to, say, fans. Like, say, more in Germany, where a lot of teams are owned by the fans. They're kind of cooperatives where fans can buy shares in their company. They can vote in their elections, and that's great. It leads, and you find a similar situation in someone like Barcelona, which is great. But then you measure that against success, right? Because what fans want is for their team to do really well, and it's amazing how much fans will ignore, how much they will ignore in the name of success. So Manchester City is a good example. I mean, Manchester City are an old football team with a deep football culture and a very strong identification with the city of Manchester, and a largely unsuccessful team. But then the money came in, and now they have success, extraordinary success. And when Pep Guardiola was asked not that long ago, well, how do you explain the success of Manchester City? He said, money. They have money to buy players. So fans, I think, are torn between the values of a team and the fact they want their team to succeed. So I think football at the high levels, I mean, with big clubs, and with national associations, is an experience of a contradiction which just cannot be resolved. And I think that's fine. I don't think that's I think we should experience contradictions. I think contradictions are productive. And then religion, I could talk about that. Mm-hmm. I think that, there is a polytheism in football, which is very interesting. That and when people think about religion, it's often, when philosophers think about religion, they usually reduce it to the existence or non-existence of certain metaphysical entities. Do you think there is a God? Do you believe in a God? So on and so forth. And this is completely irrelevant to religious practice. Religious practice is devotional practice. It's the activity of belief, liturgy, let's say, the practice of liturgy. And the liturgy of football is watching games, being with other fans, being a fan of the team, engaging in conversations. This is religious practice. And the gods of any football team are local gods. They're the gods that which are the players, the managers, the coaches, the heroes. Each team has its kind of pantheon of gods. And I believe absolutely in my gods, and I could name my gods. It would take too long, but I could name the gods of Liverpool Football Club. I recognise that, 30, 40 kilometres away, there's Manchester United, and they've got their gods
Mhm.
and their heroes and their stories and their success, and I accept that it's fine for Manchester United to have their gods, to have their religion. I have my religion. The great thing about polytheism is that I have no desire to kill or
Yeah.
persecute Manchester United fans because of their belief in their gods. I can tolerate other sets of gods. In fact, I can even enjoy it. It's a great pleasure to find out. I think one of the great pleasures of football for me is talking to fans of rival teams or other teams and finding out about their local culture, what they believe. This is great. So there is a way in which there is a healthy polytheism in football as a kind of religion, and also it's one where the experience of religious practice, devotional practice, is really sensory. Right? It's something which happens through the senses. We see, we smell, we hear. So it's a religion where everything is visible, material, and that's really good as well.
After I have read your book, the first feeling that I had was to recall Walter Benjamin's considerations on the work of art, who said we used to make the work of art after religious practices. Nowadays, we made the work of art because of political reasons. So something has changed, but in a certain manner, we still track the religious feeling, the religious behavior, and the political opening into the work of art. And after I finished this book, I said, something has Walter Benjamin smells here, but from distance. So
it's a good point. I think there's an aura in the aura which apparently has been lost from the artwork. I don't believe any of that. I don't believe a word Benjamin says, and Adorno is even worse. Don't get me started on Adorno. But and also someone that understood nothing about football. But the aura is, there is aura in football. There's aura, and there's that which contradicts aura. There is both things at the same time. There is aura and there is capital. There are commodification of players and the exploitation of fans and the workers who build the stadiums. Both things at once. That's a much more interesting thought and a much more complicated thought. And it's not a question of, but we do that as fans. We do that when we're watching a game. As fans, we are experiencing the aura of, which is a kind of aesthetic aura. But we're not stupid. We're not deluded at that point. We are. One thing I tried to emphasize in the book, which is important to me, is on the one hand, football requires a certain stupidity. I'm a 61-year-old man, and I still passionately believe in the team that I've supported since I was 2 or 3 years old, and there's a kind of stupidity to that. On the other hand, there's an extraordinary intelligence in relation to football, in the way it's discussed, the way it's expressed, and the question of who gets to speak. I think so. For example, the other night, 2 nights ago, I went over to see the twin sons of a very good friend of mine, who've just got into football. They're 7 years old, and their father doesn't really know that much about football, and he knows that I know a lot about football. So I went over. I spent the evening with these 2 7-year-old boys, and like a lot of 7-year-old boys, they have an extraordinary intelligence. They can absorb facts, right, really quickly. And so we talked, for hours about different teams, about the history of the game. They had these encyclopedias with all the great players listed, and they'd memorized it. And at that point, you're speaking as a 7-year-old to a 7-year-old child as a complete equal. And that's another great thing about football. I think there's an equality to being a fan, which, yeah.
And there's also a curiosity that somehow makes us live with our heart of kids and makes it eternal. Also in terms of joy and disappointment, we are glad as the little ones, and we become disappointed as the little ones when our favorite team has a failure. So I would like to come a little bit back to this thesis that football is polytheistic, because as you said, we cherish local gods. We have a certain sense of patronage for our local grounds. So Anfield of Liverpool has the power of a polis somehow with his own gods. So has Old Trafford and so on. And when gods fight, the Olympic Society emerges. So Liverpool fans have recently watched Diogo Jota scoring against his former club, Wolverhampton Wanderers, in the Premier League for 1-0. And it seemed that he masked his joy, albeit he has been fully aware of his success, especially in such a difficult season for Liverpool. So I was wondering, what place takes into consideration football in such a particular situation when a player turns against his former gods, just to keep the allegory of football as a polytheistic world?
Yeah, well, you can. You can do that. It happens, and you have to behave in the right moral way. So, if Diogo Jota scores against his former club, that's okay, but he can't celebrate. So it's, it happens. Players go from team to team. There's a question. There's a question about whether that's possible in all cases. Can you play for Real Madrid and Barcelona? I think Luis Figo did that. And in the case of Liverpool, I mean, we had a striker, Michael Owen, who was a brilliant player who played for Manchester United, and that was difficult, right? So in a sense, you have to accept that there is, as long as you don't celebrate, you don't humiliate the fans of the team that you've left, you can exchange your gods. So to give you another example would be someone like Luis Suarez. Suarez was, one of the greatest players I've ever seen for Liverpool, and I really love Luis Suarez as a football player. And he left and went to Barcelona, and that's fine. That's fine. And what that means is that when he has to acknowledge his debt to Liverpool, his love of the city and the fans, and he had good reasons for moving. So you can shift your gods, right? You can, football is a kind of syncretism in that way. I think it would be really healthy if we were able to adopt this kind of polytheism in other areas of our lives. And we didn't have this kind of ferocious attachment to one God or one nation, but where we acknowledge that there's a plurality of nations, a plurality of gods, and our gods are the best gods because they're our gods, but other people have their gods too, and they have good reasons for believing in those. And sometimes, in certain cases, you get to change gods. That's possible. Why not? It doesn't make you a heretic. So I think I take a much more pagan view of this.
Yeah, by the way, I was recalling Kant's ending to The Eternal Peace when he said that the philosopher shouldn't be the man of a single idea. He cannot be an ideologist. He can be a philosopher, meaning not creating propaganda, not embracing a single idea. And I think it's the same with football players. So,
I think so.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So we're on the same thing.
Yeah, I think there is. I'd go further. I'd say that any philosophical view which reduces reality to a single idea is a mistake. I think any view, like you can explain everything as in relationship to say substance in Spinoza, or in relationship to monads in Leibniz. I think you need at least two concepts. At least two concepts. So that the temptation to explain everything in relationship to one big thing is very strong, and it has to be, I think, steadfastly refused for philosophical reasons. It's my view.
And I share it. Now, I would like to go a little bit to the other very interesting piece of your puzzle on soccer, meaning football seen as tragedy. So we know that the beauty of any tragedy is to impose a destiny. So we have proper names for tragedies. We have Hamlet, we have Oedipus, we have Liverpool, as a matter of fact. So Nietzsche would say that one of the risks to which modern tragedy is exposed, speaking in terms of romanticism, for example, is that of behaving as an artwork dependent on spectators. So I recall that criticizing Schlegel, Nietzsche argues that as the notion of spectator without spectacle is absurd, the notion of spectacle without spectator resists, because the work of art should have a truth and should have a being that is independent and stays for itself. So I would like to ask you, keeping this sort of allegory, how this pandemic brought to our attention the renewal of these romantic incursions into the spectacle without spectators? Because in what concerns Liverpool, I recall when I read Klopp's biography in Rhythm of Heavy Metal, that there was a thesis here according to which the force of Anfield is known as the 12th player of the team. So the spectators are important. They are somehow ontologically included in what concerns this large work of art that is a football game. So what difference makes for the energy of a game in the stadiums that sound of the voice of supporters? How will this pandemic change the experience of football?
Well, it has changed. It's changed it, disastrously badly. I mean, it's again, I'm torn on this question. I'm looking for a picture in my book, which I can't find. Okay. The picture it's a photograph which says football without fans is nothing. Football without fans is nothing. It was a photograph taken during a protest by local fans against the increase in ticket prices. So, but I think if you look at just, last, the game against Real Madrid on Wednesday, Liverpool, Real Madrid, it was awful because the fans were not there. The fans had, this isn't true with every team, but it's true with a lot of teams. The fans have an effect. They induce fear. Oh, there we are. Football without fans is nothing. Great. So without that, without the presence of fans, the whole thing becomes, I think, and is becoming meaningless. I think this season has been well, people call it a strange season. I think it's just it's a weird and pointless season, and it's not that just you need fans there, but it's a misunderstanding of, as you say, the tragic structure. I mean, I've always had questions about Nietzsche's theory of tragedy, although I'm it may be because it's historically false, but there's no evidence for it. I mean, but it does explain football really well, in the sense in which there is the Apollinean, the domain of what he calls beautiful, the beautiful appearance, the beautiful shine of objects, which is the players on the pitch playing and the movement of the ball, and the Dionysian will, which is what the fans are doing, and there's no individuation in the fans. The fans are a kind of a mass, and in a sense, what's going on in a football game is some relationship between the Dionysian core of being, which is expressed in the fans, and that's projected onto the beautiful appearance of play. And there's a relationship between the two. And And it, and when you take the fans away, then you end up with football without drama, which is what we're seeing. What we see when we're watching, say, Champions League games. It's soulless. It's desiccated. It's like it is football played by very good football players at a very high level, but it's in a sense meaningless. And I'm sick of it. I want the fans back.
Probably soon will happen that.
And also, I think what we, I remember that one of the things I discuss in the book is this movie Zidane by a friend of mine, Philippe Parreno, and it's a great film. And there's a commentary by Zidane in the film, and he talks about his experience of the game and how he can hear the crowd. Right? He's talking about him playing for Real Madrid, and he can hear everything in the stadium. Right? He can hear somebody, one person shouting, or somebody, opening a packet of chips or something like that. Or he can hear, his senses are incredibly heightened in that moment, and that sense in which the being of the player is intrinsically related to the fans, I think, is something which is very hard to express. It doesn't make any sense in a way. It doesn't make any sense on television, right? Because a lot of us watch football on TV. But when you're there in a crowd at a game, you immediately understand what's happening, right? And a crowd can have really serious effects on a game. And then there are counterexamples. So, for example, in England this year, West Ham United are doing really well. And their fans are notoriously, their stadium is awful, and their fans are always complaining. And so the fact that they've been absent for a year has been great, because the players could just play, and it turns out they're quite a good team. So in some rare instances, not having the fans there is a good thing. Yeah, but I think on the whole, it's terrible.
So the yells from the stadium are something that goes after Dionysian experiences. So it's music somehow, is voice, is dance sometimes. So it's movement. But there is something else that repulses me about this relationship between Apollonian and Dionysian experiences. And this is the aesthetics, or the aesthetics of existence, that is represented by a football player. Because I'm not referring here, not yet at least, at labor and an aesthetics that is imposed by work, by labor, by efforts, but to football as what I will invite to discuss with you as, let's say, an aesthetics of existence in a more Foucauldian approach. Because during a football training, a player is disconnected with what usually we call quotidian realm. So he has to behave aesthetically, no entertainment, no Dionysian experiences. So do you accept this interpretation of football as carrying an aesthetics of existence? And if the answer is yes, then what kind of life ideals do you think it hunts?
For the fans or the players?
Both.
The players, I don't know. It's peculiar, isn't it? I watched this long documentary which wasn't very good, about Liverpool's campaign last year and winning the Premiership. You realise that a lot of the players are really not that interesting and have rather kind of simple-minded views of things. And these are kids. These are young men who are being trained who are very good at playing football, and are trained to perform in a certain way. And I'm in a sense puzzled by the simplicity of their view of the world. It's and I wonder whether it's true or not. I mean, players know how to. They're trained in media training to just say the right thing. Fans interest me much more. fans are much more complicated creatures, and I think what interests me is not interests me, but what I particularly enjoy is the way in which football can draw people in, so you can have this experience of ecstasy when something goes really well. And if you're there with your friends watching a game, there will be moments of extraordinary ecstasy, and then disappointment, distance, people making cynical remarks, abusing the players, or making intelligent comments about what's wrong with the play. We kind of zoom in and zoom out of football. And I think both these things are really, really important. That we have a kind of, so like going back to tragedy, someone at the front door, welcome to Zoom world. Like tragedy, there's what's wrong with Nietzsche's view is that it reduces the spectators to a kind of a Dionysian mass, a kind of intoxicated mass, like it's like being in a club or something, and maybe it does make sense of the experience of techno, the Dionysian. Whereas, and that's part of what happens in football. What interests me more is the forms of reasoning, the forms of discussion, rational discussion that happen around football by fans. So there is I think I quote Gadamer at a certain point talking about pensive distance. So we tend to imagine that the audience of ancient Greek tragedy was kind of there with the actors on the stage, completely identified with the actors, with the drama. I don't believe that. I think that there was a distance, a pensive distance, a reflective distance, and it's that distance which is essential to the moment of understanding what is actually unfolding on the stage, and that's also an ironic distance in tragedy. Similarly, in football, I think it's the moments when you pull out from your immersion of the game and you discuss what's going on, and of course I'm doing that all the time. I mean, on my phone with my son and with different groups of people I'm talking to, and that's really important, I think. Not sure whether I answered all your questions.
Actually it goes after what I want to put on the table, because it's true that whenever you are a supporter, it's a sort of energy and a sort of commitment, a sort of loyalty that becomes a very important topic of interest for everyone. So in love, for example, one relationship can go for years or for a few months, but whenever you talk about a commitment with a football team, actually it's love for a lifetime. So
yes.
I think that this kind of energy, this kind of commitment is also supported by, let's say, the energy that you borrow from the other, because it's also a sort of a pensive distance, as Gadamer said, but in the same time, it's a form of authority that you find to your neighbor, to your colleague from the stadium, that endorses this kind of commitment and creates a sort of, let's say, sense of comfort, of security, of maturity. And I would like to ask you, do you think that, and this is a personal question, do you think that this way of life that you had in the proximity of football, given the fact that your father, as I know from your book and from your interviews, introduced you to this world, so it was a paternal figure that created a sort of symbiosis between you and football that you have inherited and you have given further to your family, and this kind of connection that somehow gave you certain roots, let's say, for your own existence, accelerated somehow or shaped your maturity, your becoming as an adult?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, it's I think so. I think it's Because the lessons of football are hard lessons, which is loss, failure, defeat. I mean, in any league, I don't know how many teams there are in the Romanian league, but in England there's 20 and only one team can win. That's so 19 teams are going to fail. So in football at all times, the vast majority of football fans experience disappointment, defeat, loss, and that's an important lesson to learn, it seems to me. And it's also it makes you stronger in defeat, and it makes you more humble in victory. I think you know, when I was in Madrid when Liverpool won the Champions League, and with my son, and it was a glorious experience. It was very hard to get there, and it was very expensive to get there. We were only there for a day, but we were there, and we didn't have tickets to the game, but we were there with fans and in bars, and it was a wonderful, wonderful time. But you knew this was going to pass. This is transient. This team will fade, but at least you experience that joy together. Now, in relation to the earlier thing you said, I think this is very interesting. That, I mean, love is a beautiful thing, and relationships are, can be fantastic. They can be awful, but in a sense, to fall in love and to be in love and to have a relationship is to make some sort of, you're making some sort of choice, some kind of choice. With me, with a football team, this is, I didn't choose to support Liverpool. This was
You're a fan by birth.
Yeah, and it wasn't my father. It was my grandmother as well. My grandmother was a passionate Liverpool fan. And I remember about 10 years ago, maybe I'm inventing that date a little bit. At some point in let's say 10 years ago, I went back to see my grandmother's grave to put some flowers there.
And she had the Liverpool logo.
Yeah, she has a Liverpool club crest on her grave, and I took a photograph of her gravestone and sent it to a friend of mine, and they said, "Is that a Liverpool, crest on the?" I said, "Of course it is." What else could it be? It had never crossed my mind that was a strange thing to do, or that could be seen as a kind of an odd thing to have on your grave. It made perfect sense to me. So this idea of a commitment which pre-exists you is quite interesting, thinking about that religiously. Because if we think about, actually the structure of that would be much more like, much more like Judaism than Christianity, in a sense. If Christianity is premised upon the idea that one has to choose to have faith, in the risen Christ, say, versus Judaism, which is usually a pre-existing, you are, by virtue of who you are bound in a covenant. You're bound to the past, and whether you follow Jewish practice or not, you are Jewish. And in that sense, being a Liverpool fan is more like that for me. So, of course, what I find unintelligible, and it does happen, is people who change team, or will go from one team to another team. So I think it's about you choose a team, and you choose a team for, often I have the reasons I did it, but often it will be because you'll ask someone, why did you support Arsenal? Say, well, I just like the colour of their shirts, I like that red and white. That just very good. I think that idea that what gets you interested in a team can be something as superficial as colour or a certain player. I think that's fine, but then that can form into a lifelong commitment, and it's a good thing.
A certain domain where this kind of commitment would be, let's say, the source of salvation for all of us is politics. And here is where I would like to bridge a little bit football, competition, power, and politics.
Okay.
And I would like to start with a fun fact. So Mohamed Salah received almost 1 million votes from Egyptians
Yeah.
and all their votes on the last presidential election. So what has politics to learn from football whenever you have this kind of situations? Do we have?
Well, I think it's
It's a sense of
I
energy.
think it's. Sorry, say that again.
A sense of energy. It's a sense of, I don't know, a cult of personality. Can be a football leader, something that can nowadays inspire a sort of commitment higher than a political leader.
Yes, because at this point in history, there's an incredibly strong, deep suspicion of politicians. I mean, whether that's right or wrong, we could discuss, but there's an incredible suspicion of politicians. So, where I'm speaking to you from, people liked Donald Trump and still do like Donald Trump because he's not a politician, right? Because he's a celebrity, and that kind of so, and again, people aren't stupid. They're not, they know who he is. He's a corrupt, vain, racist buffoon, but at least they feel that they know who this guy is. And I think with someone like Salah, it makes perfect sense that in a country like Egypt, which is a deeply corrupt regime supported by external powers, and where the overthrow of the dictator Mubarak led to the first democratic elections, which led to the election of the Muslim Brotherhood, which then the very people in Tahrir Square who've been protesting against Mubarak were then begging for the military to come back and take control, which is just, why wouldn't you vote for Mohamed Salah in Egypt? It's a way of registering protest. I mean, I think the politics of football are complex. The best way, just complex. There is no. So I start the book with this idea of socialism, and I have evidence for that in relationship to something like Bill Shankly and certain other players and coaches, and I can tell that story. But it's, for me, it's an aspiration. It's wishful thinking, really. It's something I'd like to believe is the case, because the fact is that football can flourish in all sorts of different political conditions. And, we only have to think about, say, Brazil. The emergence of Brazilian national football emerged in conditions of dictatorship in Brazil. And that did compromise the Brazilian players, particularly in the 1960s. Similarly, Argentina, when Argentina won the World Cup in 1978, and similarly with the countries of the, we could extend that all across the world. So football is, it can be democratic, it can be authoritarian, it can be dictatorial. It can also be, it can be patriarchal and homophobic, but it can also be the opposite. I think one of the interesting things about football in the United States is because football's not a mass sport. It's popular, but not a mass sport. It's more of a participant sport, and it's a sport where you're more likely to find women than men who are experts in football. So if I go to my local bar around the corner and I'd say, who knows things about football, it's probably going to be women, and they probably played at school and probably played at college, and they're good. So, and down the road from where I live, there's a bunch of football pitches, soccer pitches, and there you've got teams which are uniformly mixed gender, men and women playing together, and you've got trans football teams, so it's the whole, so to that extent, football is malleable, it's flexible, and it reflects the different cultural conditions out of which it emerges. And but there's no point deceiving ourselves that politically it can be pretty unpleasant, right? And the football's governing body, FIFA, is completely corrupt.
Mhm.
It used to be even more corrupt, but it's still corrupt, and that led to abominations like the giving of the World Cup to Russia, and then now to Qatar. These are. I mean, Russia's understandable because at least there's a tradition of Russian football, great Russian football, great teams. But Qatar, a country with no history of playing football, no stadiums, and it's just, and the World Cup has to be in the winter. This is outrageous, it seems to me. So that the football is corrupt at every conceivable level, and yet we still watch it. We still are engaged by it. There's still something. There's still enough to hang on to.
Now, given the fact that we have reached our discussion, this topic of socialism and its interconnections with football, I would like to discuss a little bit, because we don't have too much time at our disposal left, but as much as we have, I would like to take advantage of it. And I would like to bridge socialism and football using the image of Jurgen Klopp. So you said into your book that football has a left-wing construction somehow, because you see it through the lenses of a working class philosophy. You even call and you quote Zanetti at a certain point, who considers that socialism is not ideological, but it represents a way of life, humanity, mankind, solidarity. So it reflects association, it reflects the spirit of a team. And in my opinion, all these elements involve the sense of equality, which is a socialist value. Then we have Jurgen Klopp, who declares himself a leftist, and he said, and I quote, "I am more left than middle. I believe in the welfare state. I'm not privately insured. I would never vote for a party because they promise to lower the top tax rate." So my question would be, given all these elements, do you think that football is more oriented towards socialism by the value of equality that creates the spirit of a team despite the multiple roles that players own, or by that of solidarity? If you would have to choose a socialist value that it's at the core of football, what that value would be?
Or if I think football it's possible to have a socialist ethos in football in specific instances, specific context, and there can't be a principled, systematic answer to this. This has to be contextual. If we're thinking about Spain, then we could think about the Basque teams, Bilbao, Real Sociedad, and there's a local ethos there. Barcelona as a football team would also would espouse a kind of equality, inclusion, and that's obviously over against the memory of the Spanish Civil War, and the fact that Real Madrid were the team of Franco and the team of the dictatorship, and so on and so forth. So in the English context, Liverpool is it's a city which is in England but not of England. I think that's the best way I could describe it. And it to that extent, it's like New York. New York is in the United States but not of the United States. Liverpool is a port. It's a place of transit where people have come and gone, a place where immigrant communities have gone, but where the basic currency is at the level of kind of ordinary people, ordinary working class people. That's the cultural center of gravity. It's a country without. It's a city without an aristocracy, without governmental institutions. All these things are very important. And then also important is the fact that because of this sense of Liverpool as in England but not of England, is that we identify as a European team. We're not an English team, we're a European team. And that can be justified through the fact that we won the Champions League 6 times. And so therefore, having Jurgen Klopp as a coach makes perfect sense. And that, now it feels like it was written in the stars, because if there's a team which is the team which most closely corresponds to Liverpool in Europe is probably Borussia Dortmund. And the fact that he came from Dortmund to Liverpool makes perfect sense. So can that be generalized? No. Is that true of Chelsea? No. Is it true of, and now, think about the Champions League semi-finals. We have these 4 teams, and suddenly the most democratic of those 4 teams is Real Madrid against Manchester City, Paris Saint-Germain, and Chelsea, all of which are funded by dirty money. Real Madrid, in that sense, look like the underdog. That's a bizarre state of affairs. So I think we have to operate contextually. I mean, so my interest is, I suppose. I want to, I see myself very much, like St. Paul, within a spirit of conversion, that I want to make Liverpool fans wherever I can find them. But when I meet people that are not Liverpool fans, but are fans of the game, that's fine too. I can talk to them. We've always got something to talk about. And for me, that's really the key thing, the fact that football allows for an equality of social interaction, right? And that's a beautiful, beautiful thing. And then it can allow for the strangest possible, experiences. So that, for example, if I wear a Liverpool top and I live in Brooklyn, and I go around the corner, and my neighborhood has got a big Yemeni and Syrian Lebanese population. So people it's a big Arabic speaking area. Anyway, and so if I go out on the street wearing this, people will look at me and say Salah, right? They just say Salah. And at that point, I could engage them in conversation. Oh, so you like Mohammed Salah, and we then have something to talk about. So there's something about football which enables ordinary interaction between people that can treat each other as equals. And I think that's fantastic, and that's what I most enjoy about football.
So it makes us getting into connection, and
yes.
At the same time, it educates us somehow, at least in the spirit of a certain value of work. And here is where I want to go to the last question of this travel that we have done together through ideas and through the world of football. So Klopp's definition of socialism sounds something like this. If I'm doing well, I want others to do well too. And then, of course, we all recall the fact that he said that this is why he'll never vote for the right in his life. So this is Klopp's definition of socialism. Do you think that it's something pure socialist, or is a Protestant socialism something that makes from Klopp quite a special phenomena? Because I've read one of your studies from 2018 where you said that there is a strong strand of Heideggerian resoluteness in Klopp, as well as an excessive work ethic. And I would like to discuss a little bit this.
Oh yeah, well, Klopp is from this, from the Black Forest, from the Schwarzwald, from that area of southern Germany, which is historically been one of the centers of pietism, a kind of extreme Protestant faith. And you can find in the poetry of Hölderlin, and so I think, and in a different way, Heidegger, though Heidegger was obviously a Catholic background, but I think with Klopp, when he was asked to explain where he came from, I remember him. There's a song he used to sing, which was, "Schaffen, schaffen, schaffen, bauen wir das Haus." Work, work, work. We're making the house. We were a local song. So what Southern Germans do is they work. So that work ethic is incredibly strong, and that is an expression of religious faith. So you're right. I think this is an important point. The socialism that I'm talking about is not Marxist. You could understand it in those terms, but that in a sense is irrelevant as far as I'm concerned. The socialism that interests me is a religious socialism, which is much more attached to Protestant traditions, Catholic traditions, and it's always seemed to me that and this is a point that historians have made, like E.P. Thompson over the years, that if you want to understand, if you want to form people that actually have an idea of fairness and equality and decency, then you're not going to do that by reading the 1844 manuscripts or going through volumes 1 to 3 of Capital. You get that through an understanding of religious life and religious inclusion and religious values. So it seems to me that the socialism of Klopp has its roots in religion, and that also gives him the other interesting facet of Klopp is the fact that for him there is something more important than football, which is God, and also intimate family relations. I think the fact that he lost his mother died during the pandemic, and Pep Guardiola's mother died in the pandemic, and these things are just more important, which means that Klopp is someone that, unlike say Jose Mourinho, who is I think a bad man. I think Mourinho is just a bad man, and a cynic and a realist and a pragmatist. Klopp takes football absolutely seriously, but this is just football. This is and there's football and there's coronavirus. There's football and there's your family and friends becoming sick. There's no question what's more important. So I think it's important to keep that. And one last thing I wanted to say was that what I love about, going back to what I was saying about interaction, what I really love about talking about football with people is that often people are very scared to express their opinions these days for all sorts of reasons, social media, blah, blah, blah. Football is one of the areas where you can get people to really express what they think with absolute seriousness, and to express absolute hatred for something, or absolute love for something. And at the same time, that seriousness is also comical. So what football allows us is absolutely serious conversation about things which are important to us, and an experience of levity, an experience of comical, a comical quality, and that's really, really important. And I think everything in human life should be like that. I think we should talk about things like philosophy with absolute seriousness, and be prepared to ridicule each other. And this not to be a personal insult. This is the way in which inclusion works. And I think so football relationships are largely about teasing, right? You tease each other. So I have really good friends who tease me all the time about Liverpool, and I tease them, and it's a very important aspect of social life.
So Simon, we have reached the end of our interview.
Yeah.
I would like to take at least 1 minute for a blitzkrieg series of questions, yes or no. So
okay.
no more than 1 minute, and exclusively in yes or no.
Yes or no questions. Okay, good.
So Has football taught you to face defeats easier?
Yes.
Do you see philosophical debates as football games?
Only the good ones.
Only the good ones. That's nice. Has football inspired you to create better competitive contexts for your students?
No, too few of my students know about football in New York.
Oh, that's a pity.
Yeah, I'm working on it.
And I'm sure you're going to do a good job. Is it possible to have an emancipated spectator of football in the sense that Rancière conceived it for politics and for art?
Yes. And I talked to Jacques Rancière about football once.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Has football been contaminated by the civilization of spectacle in the board sense?
Yes.
Is a university management similar in terms of stimulating and achieving performances with a football club management?
Nope.
And last but not least, is Simon Critchley working on a philosophy of football one day?
Nope. I'm working on. I'm going to write a book on mystical experience next.
Ooh.
I like to keep moving. I'll come back to football, but for the moment I'm done. This book has been a real pleasure because we can have conversations like this, and and we have all these things in common. But and the translations of the book has been. It's fascinating to because I still think in my mind that I'm writing for me and for a few people, and the fact that things can get translated and disseminated, I find it's very flattering. But in relation to football, it's particularly fascinating because then you get to look into a whole different world, right? Which is related to your world but a separate world. So I did this talk, I think you talk about in the notes in Barcelona with a very interesting man called Jordi, who was a Barcelona journalist and written a book on Lionel Messi, and we just had it's called love at first sight. You realize that here's someone that really understands football, and on every significant level of belief, we fundamentally disagree. He's a Barcelona fan, and he's very critical of Liverpool. But you completely can So being able to not just tolerate differences, but to actually love differences. Football can enable that, right? I think that's a great thing, that your enemy, the team that you despise, like in my case Real Madrid, I hate Real Madrid, but I recognize that they are a technically superior team who deserve to beat us, and if I met a Real Madrid fan, I would be prepared to do that. That wouldn't be, they're not my enemy in that sense, right? There's a difference between the kind of passionate intensity which you can have in football and the kind of thing that becomes a social media outburst or religious conflict. So we can learn a lot from football about how to feel things intensely and to not take them as seriously as we perhaps should. That makes no sense. Scrub that bit.
Well, of course,
I'm gonna go.
Related to what you have said, at least for me, the lesson that I have received about football from my father was the fact that there will be many domains in which you are going to feel yourself like a woman, but in football there is room for men and for women. So if you want to learn how love for something, meaning love for football, brings us together, this is the good place. And if you want to see people that love the same thing and because of that become enemies, but on a short period of time, meaning during a game, you have to come to see a football game and you will see competitors fighting in the name of their love, their common love.
Absolutely.
So this is how, let's say, sometimes when I see that philosophy is not preserving principles of equality, I go to football. And it's a sort of
Good.
second society, second life that deserves all our attention. Simon, it was a pleasure. Thank you
It
very
was a great pleasure. Thank you very much for inviting me and for all those interesting questions.
And whenever you have time and you have the pleasure to come to Bucharest, just let us know and we'll make all the preparations to have you here. Just
thank you very much. That's
when.
very kind. I'll take you up on that.
Thank you
Thank you
very
very
much.
much.